Hello and welcome to Richland Spotlight, where we talk with city employees and shine a light on programs, projects, and things happening within our city. I'm Mike Charbonneau. Thanks for joining us. And also today we have Bob Hammond, who is Director of Richland Energy Services. Welcome, Bob. Glad to have you.
Glad to be here, Mike.
Now, Richland Energy Service is the area's only municipal utility. Tell me what that means.
Well, most other utilities have their own board of commissions, and in our case, we report to the city council as well as all the other functions of the city, like police and fire and planning. And so that makes us unique. We're governed within both the state statute related to cities as far as governance, and then we also have some of the other governance from state and federal, like the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that governs electric utilities. So it's a little bit of a different animal, you know. But in the end, everything that we do from a policy perspective is delivered recommendations to council, and then city council makes those decisions, just like they would any other function in the city.
So we're basically a nonprofit entity then?
Yes, it's a nonprofit entity. It's we refer to it in the electrical utility space as public power or consumer-owned power. And there's two different types of electric utilities. There's the investor-owned, who really are in business to make profit for their board of governors, and then consumer-owned or public power, which is a nonprofit.
Now, you've been the director for a little over 4.5 years, you were sharing with me. Tell me about some of these successes that you've had thus far.
Well, I think the successes and maybe the inroads that we've made together in the last 4 years, we've back to this issue of a city electric utility. I think one of the key things we've done is to really connect with our city council. It's easy to be autonomous as an electric utility. I mean, because there's so much we do in that space. At the end of the day, like I said, it's all about what the city wants, the city council wants in terms of policy for their citizens. So that's a big thing that we've done, and we've done that through a lot of good work with an advisory committee, the Utility Advisory Committee, which is a group of volunteers in the electric utility, the city, basically, that help us with a bunch of issues, and then they help recommend policy to council. So council doesn't have a lot of time, you know, with everything they're doing to handle all the stuff that gets in front of them. So we really use this Utility Advisory Committee to do that. So that's a big thing. I think we've worked really hard on, you know, everything is about reliable power at a reasonable cost. Mm-hmm. So we've worked really hard at trying to figure out where do we need to put our dollars, you know, to get the best value back. So we've worked hard on our capital improvement plan. We have a utility business plan for the first time ever that we've implemented just this last year. We try to align that back to the city's strategic plan, and that sounds like a lot of, you know, the planning, where does the rubber meet the road, but it really does, because if some of these projects that we end up having to do are very expensive. So if we don't have to do them, we don't want to do them, you know. And the timing is really important on all that. So this business planning and utility planning and strategic planning we've put a lot of effort into that. We've tried to invest in technology and equipment a little bit more than we have in the past, because we do have a very lean, compared to other utilities, lean staffing, resource staffing. So we've tried to use technology and equipment, and that's some of the things I think we've worked hard on.
Well, we get a lot done, that looks like. So what are some of the challenges we may be facing?
You know, the biggest challenge for our electric utility is probably very similar to general fund for the city, and it's that, you know, there's so much to do with the existing funds. The expectation for service is so high, and it should be, you know, to keep the power on, and just trying to keep the costs and the rates down. That is the big challenge. You know, our biggest cost in the electric utility is our wholesale power costs. Mm-hmm. So we buy 100% of our power from Bonneville Power, and their costs have been rising considerably since 2009. They've risen over 40% in wholesale power costs since then, and We recently had approval for our 2016 rates, and that will bring us to about, compared to 40% on their side, our retail rates have increased in that time about 20%, about half of that. Now, the cost of power makes up about 70% of our operating cost. So we still think we're doing a lot of things to try to mitigate the wholesale power increases, but there's so much more to do with that. We just have to try to do everything we can to keep these rates as low as possible.
Well, let's talk about rate increases, because you touched on that. Recently Council approved a rate increase that took effect in July of 2015. And then, as you said, there's another rate increase that will be coming forward in January of 2016. You mentioned Bonneville Power and the cost of power as being, a problem with the rate increases. Tell me about these rate increases and why we need to do it and what customers might expect in the future.
Rate increases with electric are much different than the other utilities like the water and sewer and solid waste in the city. And they're different mainly because there's we're broken down into customer classes. So, for example, a residential customer class compared to a commercial or an industrial type of category. And we actually have about 10 different customer classes overall. And so sometimes when we talk about rate increases, we'll talk a lot about we have one customer class subsidizing another. Mm-hmm. And so on our July rate increase, it brought us in about 1.5% total revenue to the utility. It was a 10% increase in 4 different customer classes. They were the smaller revenue generating classes. Well, small general service probably isn't smaller, but the rest of them were smaller. But they were being subsidized as we looked at it and ran out on our cost of service analysis. And so we needed to do the 10% increases there. And then we've had some decisions related to how we have to be taxed by the city. The electric utility is taxed for the privilege of running the utility within the city, and the money is collected from our ratepayers, passes through the electric utility and onto the general fund of the city. So about half of that 1.5% was related to a utility tax decision that an auditor said that we weren't charging on the right base amount. So it's sort of a technical issue, but it created about half of that one. So that was the weirdness of that July increase. Not much revenue difference for us, but aligned these customer classes that had been subsidized and took care of that utility tax thing. And the next one is an overall rate increase for everybody, and it's about, overall it'll give us 9.5% more revenue in. There isn't, I think the highest, again, we're looking at customer classes and each one, I think the highest increase is 11.2, and that is on the residential side. And again, we have a utility tax component to that makes up about 1% of that 9.5%. And so look at it this way, 8.5%, you throw numbers around, people get confused about what they are. 8.5% of that was a revenue deficit, and 1% was related to utility tax. And the utility tax in this case was our city attorney made the opinion that, gave us her opinion that we didn't have the authority to charge less than the full 8.5%. So now we're charged, the utility is the full 8.5%. So again, passing that on to the customers that we had different tax rates in different customer classes. So again, lots of technical stuff with the utility and hard to speak through all that. And it's hard for customers to understand. They just want to know how much it's going to hurt their pocketbook, And I will say, when you were asking one of our achievements in the last 4 years, two additional things came to mind. One was that for the first time ever, we run this cost of service analysis out over lots of assumptions, but we run out at least 10 years and more, so that now we can start telling our customers, this is what it looks like out into the future. So we've been talking about this 9.5% increase, and the next one 18 months from now for quite a while. Every rate increase has to be processed separately and go through the Utility Advisory Committee and then on to Council. So just because we're got this forward rate projection doesn't mean we're going to raise the rates. But it does give people a chance to know what's going on and to predict what impacts that might have on them if it stays that way. So that's an improvement. And then our business services manager, Sandy Edgman, has done just a tremendous job in getting out to the, working with you guys a lot too, getting out to the messages to the customers. And we don't want anybody ever to be surprised. I mean, that's the worst thing in the world, is to be surprised. And we want to make sure people have access to how our decisions are made. So we try to publish whenever UAC meeting is, encourage people to go to them, come and speak at public hearings, talk to staff, call us up. We have direct numbers on our guy that does the cost of service analysis and all that stuff. So that's probably more than you wanted to hear about the rates, but that.
Well, now we've talked a little bit about growth. You were talking about new technologies and that. So how is Richland Energy Services prepared for growth in the future in population and in just in growth of the industry?
Well, our system itself is a really good system to position for future growth, because we're not all strung out. We're not a real rural area, and we don't have a whole bunch of high rises and buildings that we're doing. So the infrastructure from an engineering and operations perspective is really pretty good shape. So then what we're doing is trying to take our capital program and look at what the big system improvements are going to need to be over time. And these things are high cost items, like we'll have probably build 4 new electrical, what we call them substations. It basically takes the high voltage power from Bonneville and transforms it down into our distribution side, and then we connect it with new feeder lines into our total distribution grid. And so in the next probably 10 to 15 years, we'll be building 4 new substations and connecting those in. And again, I talked about before the planning aspect. We will defer those until they're the right time to do each one of those, and we won't overbuild, and at the same time we have to build in a way that our customers always have reliability. And so that planning that I've talked about in the past, we had third-party consultants take a look at that, what we'd already done in-house, and confirm the things that were solid and help us change the things that needed changing. So we're confident we've got the right plan, and this forward rate program is all set up to try to help fund that. Most of all these improvements, these large improvements, we bond over so we finance all those over a 30-year period of time. So we work real hard with our Utility Advisory Committee and Council to make sure the bonding, all aspects of the bonding are solid and so forth. So again, that's probably the biggest thing from new growth. We'll have the one thing that I always want to emphasize, because I take for granted that when I talk about growth that folks may think that existing ratepayers are paying for all new development. And in fact, we have policy and we have it in our Richland Municipal Code set up so that new development pays for itself. And so once it brings the new infrastructure on, they become a regular ratepayer along with everybody else, and then it gets blended in with all the costs. But the new infrastructure that gets built, the new overhead lines, underground, special equipment that may be needed, all of that gets paid up front to us. We construct a lot of our own work in the electric utility, but we get paid up front before we do that. So, and we're always glad to talk in more details with any customers who have questions about that.
Very good. So one last question. What would you like citizens to know about their public utility that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, I have talked about it, but I want to reinforce it again. And it's that, we care. I mean, we really work we believe in public service. We believe in consumer-owned, publicly owned electric utilities versus the investor-owned. And we feel like, I mean, some of us pay those. I happen to pay Benton PUD rates, but I pay rates just like everybody else does. And, you know, we care, and we're working very hard to try to understand, and we want our customers to understand what we're doing, when we're doing it, planning on doing it, how we're doing it. We've got, for example, we've got a great website, I think, and if people will get on there, and I'm sure you guys will show the link to that, and if folks will get on there, we've got a rate calculator, so even though there is a lot of complexity to our rate structure, if somebody gets in with their own account number and logs into our rate calculator, they can know exactly what the impacts would be projected. The weird thing about electric is if the sun's shining or the wind's blowing or the ice is all around, it makes a big difference on how people use power. So it's all based on estimates, but based on those estimates of past use for a particular account, then folks can find out what the impacts will be later on. And then we have a direct contact number if they need some help with that or want to go beyond there. So I really encourage people to go to our website and dig through there and then get a hold of us.
Very good, and that's a good way to close. So I want to thank you, Bob, for talking to us about Richland Energy Services and the rate increases that citizens might expect. And of course, for you, if you have questions, go to the city's website and check out that, or give Energy Services a call. Thanks again for watching Richland Spotlight. I'm Mike Charbonneau.